Welcome to another in the series of the Ort in the Boardroom chats. I'm David Zidel, and I'll be in conversation with Mandy Wiener today. Mandy, as we know, is a highly credible journalist, author, and multi-award winning reporter. The way we're going to operate this is I'll do a quick introduction. We will then have a chat, and then we'll open it up to questions at the end. In the meantime, if anybody wants to ask any questions, you can write it in the chat. Other than that, I'll kind of look a little bit at the chat to see what type of questions are coming up. I'll try and incorporate it in the questions. And then what I will do is open it up to anybody who wants to ask you questions. The fascinating thing is Mandy needs absolutely no introduction, but I'm still going to introduce her. So Mandy is one of the incredible journalists and authors in this country. Some of the topics of her books are absolutely frightening, and we're going to get into how did you do that and were you not afraid of doing it a little bit later on. She hosts the Midday Report on 702. She's won a number of different awards, and she's written a number of different books. So if you look at the books that Mandy has written, it's quite a few. It's from Killing Kebble, which was exposing the underworld. We're going to talk about that. Were you not afraid when you were doing the book? We're looking at co-authoring in 2013. It's the Oscar story. Interestingly enough, there are two different titles for the same book, one in America and one here. It's the Ministry of Crime, and then the latest one in 2020 was the Whistleblowers. So again, we're going to go through a little bit of this. And besides all of this, Mandy's got her own Mandy Wiener media company. So one of the things that Mandy is known for right now is hosting the Midday Report, a hard-hitting business show, fantastic to listen to. And Mandy interviews other people, so it's nice for me to be interviewing you. Just a little bit more is the things around the book. That the book Killing Kebble sold over 100,000 copies. Obviously a bestseller. Interestingly enough, most people might not know this, you only need to sell 3,000 books to be a bestseller. So you can see 100,000 is beyond a bestseller. Shortlisted for the Alan Paton Sunday Times Literary Award, and she was Book of the Year on Jenny Cruz Williams' book show. The second book also was chosen as a Book of the Year for 2013. As I mentioned, she's got the media business where she goes through providing the theory and the practical training on how to deal with yourself when you're in media interviews. Maybe we'll get a few tips as we go along. And she teaches how to write for the media. I think my kids would be the most impressed by the fact that she has over 300,000 followers on Twitter. And besides that, she's a mother, 2 kids. As we said, she started off working with Eyewitness News. She's on most of the top radio stations around South Africa. And she spends her life, I think, on the radio and then giving talks, writing books. So Mandy, I'm going to start off with asking you, first of all, where were you born? Where did you grow up? Your schooling life, just very briefly. And did anything within that lead you to become a journalist and where you are today? And then we'll kind of unpack it a little bit more as we go along. So just where were you born and kind of what was your schooling, and did that have any influence on you?
Thank you so much, David. And thank you, everyone. And thank you, Ort, for inviting me. Just a pre-warning, there's a very good chance that either one of my children will come in at some point, or that I will be dropped by load shedding, because we know that's so unpredictable. So I'm just warning everyone, but we will persist as we do in the South African way. So I was born in Polokwane, which was then Petersburg, in 1982. And when I grew up in Polokwane, it was a really small town. Now it's definitely grown. It's become a city. When I grew up, it was very much a town, not a city. So it was a pretty small place. It was a really great upbringing because it was such a small place. I went to a government school. and government high school, a Model C school. So I think that really contributed to the fact that it was a really good grounding, a really good base for me. I was the only Jewish kid in the province when I matriculated. So that I think also probably defined me in a way. And I the one thing that I think also contributed was I had fantastic English teachers throughout primary school and throughout high school. I had a cohort of just really, really fabulous English teachers, which I think helped to nurture my love of the language and of reading. And I also grew up in a house where there was a lot of awareness of the world around me. So the news was always on. We listened to SAFM because we couldn't get 702 at that stage. So it was quite a novelty when we came to Joburg, to the hypermarket for our monthly shop, to listen to 702. But I grew up very much on SAFM, and the news was always on, and there was always a newspaper delivered every day, and I was always reading a lot. And if I think back now, I remember reading like Mary Higgins Clark, but then I also remember reading these like very, very serious nonfiction books, which were very much about current affairs. And I think that really had a contribution as well, that I was very idealistic and very ambitious as a kid about wanting to get into the media industry and be the next Christian Amanpour. And I think it was almost a glorification of the industry. And I always just assumed that I'd become a journalist. And yet I still didn't go into journalism straight away. I took a year off after school. I took a gap year. And I went to the UK and went to go and be an assistant in a school for deaf kids in Newbury. And I came back after that realizing that I really wanted to study journalism. And people always assume that I went to Rhodes, but I actually went to UJ. I went to the University of Johannesburg, and that was great in many ways because I was kind of in the big smoke in the big city, and I was able to get a foot in the door very early on at 702 while I was still studying. So I think that entire upbringing of coming from a small town but still having a big world view really helped in nurturing the whole idea of going into journalism.
So what did you do to get into 702 to start off with? Because you don't obviously land the big role in the beginning. Did you work late at night? What did you do to get your foot in the door?
Oh, yeah, absolutely. This is the one thing that I always tell people about getting into the industry is that you start at the very bottom and do whatever you can. So I started off, I did a couple of internships. I went to Sports Illustrated for a week, and I did a couple of odd things here or there just to try and get some industry experience. But it all seemed quite daunting and quite impossible to actually get in. So I started working at UJ FM. It was called Rao Radio at that stage in my second year. And I was a newsreader and the news editor there, but I didn't actually know what I was doing. And I remember one day I was in the Rao Radio offices, and I overheard somebody, and this is a terrible story actually, but I overheard somebody talking about the fact that they were going for an interview at 702. And I was like, oh, really? And they were like, yeah, you can go too. They're looking for traffic writers. So I got hold of the person and went along and went for an interview at 702 to be a traffic writer. And that was the first job I got, was in my second year, was writing traffic for Harry Sideropoulos, whose studio I was in for 6 months. And I tease him all the time because he honestly did not know what my name was for 6 months. And I used to see him every single morning. And I used to write for Damon Calvari and Aki Anastasiou. And that was my first job. And from there, I got a job call screening overnight. So I would go in at 2:00 in the morning on a Saturday and call screen. And, there's only very interesting people awake at 2:00 in the morning listening to talk radio. Generally people are insomniacs or are things I should not say about people that are awake at that stage. But I used to call screen, and that's starting at the very, very bottom. And then I started writing online news at EWN. I would transcribe interviews. And I was begging Katie Ketapodis for a job. I kept saying, please give me a job as a reporter. And eventually she relented and sent me out in my very first story, which was to interview residents of Houghton about water cuts. I mean, it doesn't get more suburban than that. It's like the easiest thing in the world to go and knock on doors and interview people about water cuts. And I was with a friend who lived in Houghton, who I said, come along with me, let's go and do this. And I rang a doorbell, and it just so happened that a group of guys rocked up at exactly that point wanting to steal a car. So I was held up at gunpoint on my very first story. And for some reason, I hit record on my recorder. So I recorded the whole thing. And these guys were holding a gun at us and saw the mic flag on my microphone, which said 702. And they said, are you a reporter? And I said, yes. And then they apologized and gave me back all my belongings. And the whole thing landed up on the front page of the Star newspaper. And Katie Ketapodis gave me a job.
Wow. So you literally got in by accident.
No, it was all orchestrated. I found these guys to come and help me up.
So it's interesting that you started off and getting into it was because of a crime, and then you became almost like a crime reporter, and your first book was on crime. It was on killing Kebble and the whole story of that. So how did you transition from that? What was the lead up to then reporting on crime and then writing your first book?
So after that, I did a lot of reporting. My friends will tell you that I just worked all the time, pretty much, breaking news stories, rushing out. I recall being at a friend's house who may or may not be watching this webinar right now on a Friday night and having to leave the table because there'd been a train crash in Vosloorus, and I had to rush there at like 9 o'clock on a Friday night. And I was constantly just chasing breaking news all the time. I was always the first person to stick my hand up to say, I want to go first. I'll be there. I'll report on the breaking news. And I kind of built my reputation that way. And then the Kebble shooting happened, and I kind of fell into that story. I was covering the Celebi corruption case as well. And kind of halfway through covering all of that, I decided that I wanted to write a book. I'd always wanted to write a book. And I went to Jenny Chris Williams, who was at 702 at the time. And I said to her, I want to write a book. And she sent me to a publisher. And I'd never written anything in my life. I'd written one magazine article. But I had this idea in my head that I wanted to write a book. And the first publisher I went to, they were like, we're not really sure about this. And then I let the idea marinate for a while. And then I went to Terry Morris at Pan Macmillan, and I told her about this idea that I wanted to write a book on Kebble and Celebi and the shooters. And she offered me a book deal without me having really written anything. And I wrote Killing Kebble pretty quickly, actually. I think I wrote it in about 3 months because I didn't know what I was doing. I just wrote it and hoped for the best. And it was quite innovative because it included tweets and there was interviews with Mikey Schultz. And I didn't realize what I had at the time. And then when it came out, it was, it kind of surprised me a lot because I didn't expect it to have the kind of impact that it did and to be so widely read and to do so well. And that was really a game changer for me.
So when you're writing the book, first of all, are you worried at all that the information you're giving out is information that people don't know? Were you fearful for your life at any stage? Were you fearful that the people you're writing about are going to come out to get you? Because you're dealing with the underworld, really. You're dealing with people who don't discuss things over a boardroom table. That's the one question. And the other question is, what was your process of writing? Did you have a process of writing where you got up at a certain time every day and spent a certain amount of time? Or was it a way of just, you took everything that you had and just kind of dumped it?
So the irony actually is that getting the shooters to agree to killing Kebble was done over a boardroom table. That's the great irony there. But, the question I probably get asked most often is, was I afraid? And when I was doing that book, I wasn't at all, because everyone knew what I was doing. So I wasn't kind of sitting in the shadows, typing away and then coming out with this massive expose. Everyone knew exactly what was coming. They were all part of the process. They all saw the book beforehand. Michael Schultz got the chapters before he got to see the whole book. He got to read the whole book beforehand, and his wife read it for him. Agliotti saw the book beforehand. Everyone knew what was coming. So I wasn't a threat in any way. I don't expose anything about anyone. I think many people quite like the platform actually, for them to be featured or to be profiled. Subsequent to that, when I wrote Ministry of Crime a couple of years ago, which looked at Radovan Krejcir and Nafis Modak in Cape Town and the other criminal networks around the police. I think that was a bit more serious. I was far more concerned then. And also since I've had children, I'm also much more aware of what I'm writing and the kind of stories that I'm doing as well.
Okay. Did you showed the chapters to the people beforehand? Did you have to change anything within the book based on that, or were they happy to let it go as it was?
A pretty innocuous things, like small things that might affect people around them. But I'd always said to them, I will change something if it's factually incorrect, but I won't change my opinion based on you asking me to. So I was quite clear on that. And also something they may have disclosed to me, which they realized could be problematic for them, incriminate themselves, or, I was obviously quite mindful of that.
And then going on to your next book, the Oscar book, you wrote it together with, I think it was Barry Bateman, you wrote the book with him. Take us through that as well. And is it different writing a book together with somebody? The one before that as well with... you also wrote
Lucy Piccoli,
yeah. You also wrote that one together with him. So just talk us through writing a book on your own compared to writing it together with somebody.
Yeah, look, it's very tricky. It really is to write a book with someone. So with Lucy Piccoli, he sat down and spoke to me for hours and hours, and then I did the writing. With the Oscar book, Barry and I wrote half. But we all saw every word of that book, which is quite a doorstop. It really is quite a chunky book, because it's kind of the exhaustive analysis of the trial. It's very difficult because I'm used to writing on my own. Barry had a very different style to me, but we also complemented each other. So he had been in the courtroom, he followed the minutiae, every detail of it, whereas I took a broader, more holistic look. Also, I had a baby the week before the trial started. So my son, he was born, literally the week before the Oscar trial started. So I was kind of watching this trial that the world's media had descended on with a newborn baby, and then tried to write a book within 9 months after that. So it was pretty tricky to do. It was a serious challenge, but we managed to pull it off. And that's because I worked with Barry, and we've managed to collaborate together and get it out.
So that whole story, do you know the reason why it's got a different title in America, why it's called One Tragic Night as opposed to Behind the Door?
I'm not sure. I mean, that was a decision by the US publishers, but I think it's because South Africans followed the trial so closely. It was a daily soap opera almost in South Africa. I think people were much more familiar with the concept of the door and Reeva being behind the door, whereas in the US that concept wasn't so kind of instilled in their consciousness as it was in South Africa. So I think that's why they went with that title.
Great. And then your next book, The Ministry of Crime, you exposing the underworld. Again, where did that come from? Were you not, now you did have kids. Did you worry about that? Or again, a little bit behind the story of that book?
So that came from my reporting on Radovan Krejcir and on the police in general for years. I'd been following the relationship between organized crime and the police, and it was something that I'd done a lot of work on for Eyewitness News. So I felt that could also live pretty well in a book, because there were so many different incidents, and it was actually quite complex, the relationship between various police officers, various different criminal elements. So fitting that all together, and I mean, it's just unbelievable how extensive the network is. We know a lot about state capture and the Guptas and how state-owned entities were captured, but the police and the NPA were captured too. And that's why I felt it was important to write that book about the proximity of organized crime to law enforcement, because that's something that's had a real detrimental effect on the criminal justice system. But I think this was more serious. I think that obviously we had seen a lot more murders happening. There was this trail of bodies. Nobody had been convicted. So a lot of it was in the media already, and it was just me kind of pulling it all together, really, for the readers.
And then your most recent book, The Whistleblowers, is that kind of like part 2 of that book? It's kind of what happened afterwards, or not?
In a way, but different. I had spent so much time writing about organized crime and about bad guys that I wanted to write about good guys too. And I just felt that there wasn't enough attention being placed on good, patriotic South Africans who had decided to stand up and hold power to account and call out the corrupt. And for me, I felt that it was really important to shine a spotlight on these good people when I'd spent so much time writing about the corrupt and about the criminal and about people who are just doing bad things. And the genesis of that was I'd spoken to one particular whistleblower who wanted to do a book, and that book just never came to fruition. But it made me realize that there was definitely a bigger book here around various whistleblowers. And this is by no means an exhaustive account of every whistleblower in South Africa. It's just, stories that interested me or grabbed me, and I decided to tell individual stories, because corruption is a huge issue in South Africa. But if we are going to deal with corruption, we need to encourage whistleblowers to come forward. And there are some serious problems with that process, the kind of protection in place for whistleblowers, how inadequate the law is, how whistleblowers are treated, the stigmatization, the outcomes for them, the end result is really dire. And that's why I felt that was a book that needed to draw attention to this issue.
My cousin said to me today when I spoke to him and I said I was interviewing him, he said, wow, wouldn't it be great if Mandy could create an audiobook where she reads it through herself? Have you ever thought of creating an audiobook, and would you do that?
A lot of people have asked me why there aren't audiobooks and why don't I do it. So interestingly enough, there actually isn't a huge market, surprisingly, according to the important people in the publishing world, for an audiobook. I could just do it myself. It would take a long time because some of my books are quite long. So I just don't really have the time to read them all. But I need to block off a few weeks and maybe try and do it. That means I have to read them all again.
And Mandy, for people out there who want to write a book, a lot of people say there's that saying, everybody's got a book in them. Have you got any hints or tips for anybody who wants to write a book, a way forward, now that you've written a few of them? What are the key things that somebody should follow if they want to write a book?
Not to dissuade anyone, but I do think that everyone wants to write a book. And I get contacted by so many people that want to write a book or think their stories are important or want to publish a book. And not every story is a book. There are lots of other interesting platforms like podcasts or blogs that your story could live in. And also the publishing industry at the moment is not great in South Africa, just because people don't have that kind of disposable income and aren't buying as many books as we would like them to, which hopefully will change. But I do think if you want to write a book, then write it. People often want ghost writers or co-authors, and I think the best person to tell your story is yourself, and you should just get it down on paper. I also never rewrite anything, and I never delete anything either, so just write through it. So even if you think that what you're writing is rubbish, just keep writing, keep going, persist through it. And at the end, you can then fine tune and polish and rework everything. But never throw it away. Always save the draft somewhere. And please save everything to the cloud. I've heard horror stories of fellow authors who've written entire manuscripts and then laptops go missing. And awful
Yeah.
things. But and a lot of people are self-publishing. So even if you get turned down by publishers, you can definitely self-publish.
And the actual process of writing it, are you do you have a dedicated time when you write it, or is it what's your do you have a process?
So people don't realize how taxing it is. It's a huge amount of work. So you start off gung ho and you're like, yes, let's write a book, and you start off, but it takes forever. It takes a really long time. The actual editing process is very long as well. There's lots of up and down with your editor, lots of track changes and fixing things. In terms of actual writing, it's evolved over time. So before I had kids, I could write all day. I could spend 10 hours writing. Now I have to, before the apocalypse, before COVID hit, I would go and sit in coffee shops, and I would write in coffee shops because it's the only time I could get away from people, ironically. But now the whistleblowers I wrote in lockdown while I was homeschooling my kids, which was insane. So I would homeschool until 11, 12, and then I would lock myself away in my bedroom and write for a few hours or do interviews, and my kids would know that I was busy. Otherwise, I've got to snatch half an hour here, half an hour there, and that can interrupt the flow of what you're doing. Lots of late nights, early mornings, waking up very early before anyone's awake. It's very difficult to do, to try and find bits and pieces of time everywhere to get it done.
There's a question on the chat from Carolyn who says, please ask Mandy about whistleblowers and how society can encourage people to stand up for good values.
So there's a lot that society can do in terms of whistleblowers. The first is to support civil society organizations that help support whistleblowing. I think that's very important. But then it also comes down to just how society treats whistleblowers. And as you can tell from the stories in the book, many of these whistleblowers become pariahs. They're treated as impimpies, even though they have been the cause of billions of rand being returned to the fiscus and exposing all of the state capture and looting. Many of them are unemployed, they're unemployable, they wear the scarlet letter W, they are pushed to the fringes of society, where they should be lauded and appreciated and celebrated. They go to the Zondo Commission, they tell their truths, and then they go home and they don't have jobs, and they send out thousands of job applications and don't get hired. And that has to change as society. We need to really protect them and appreciate them and applaud them. And it's about making a fuss of them and employ them. If you can employ a whistleblower, employ them. Because, I know so many of them, Bianca Goodson, Suzanne Daniels, Cynthia Stimple. There are so many of them that can't find jobs, which is crazy to think that they risked it all. They were executives and they refused to look the other way. They refused to let wrongdoing go by. And now they can't pay their bonds. They are deep in debt. Many of them have got PTSD. And it's a huge shame. It really is. So we need to change the law. We have to change the Protected Disclosures Act. We need to change the way we treat them. And we need to really look at the opportunity that Zondo and the Zondo Commission presents in order to make some significant changes, because we've got to encourage them to come forward. So we've got to stack the cards in their favor.
Any other books in the pipeline? Are you writing a book or thinking of writing another book?
I think my husband would kill me if I told him I wanted to write another book right now. The process of writing a book I find very depleting. So when I bring a book out, there's also a lot of media afterwards. So this is about my 1,000th webinar that I've done, what feels like in the last few months. But I also feel like I need to give a book space and time to breathe. So I'm trying to not think about another book at this stage.
Okay, then I'm going to move.
Do you have any ideas?
I'm going to move off the topic of books then and go more into the radio type stuff. So maybe talk us through what it is or what it's like to present a high power show like on 702, the news report. It's prime time. What does your day look like? What's the preparation in preparing for a show like that? And what's it like even afterwards? Are you completely exhausted afterwards, or are you exhilarated afterwards? Maybe you can just talk us through the process.
Listen, it's pretty wild. Like the midday report is hectic. It's 10 interviews in an hour, and it's everybody who's works on that show can't get over how fast paced it is. and how quick you have to move. And you have to know a lot about a lot. So I'm always following the news. My phone's always on. I'm always checking to see what's happening, reading different articles, following breaking news. So I'm always speaking to my team, and my team's small. I've got a producer, Kamagwini, and then I've got a technical producer, Palesa, and we have a WhatsApp group, and we're often sharing story ideas. And then at 9 o'clock in the morning, Kamagwini and I will meet, and she will come up with the story she thinks that we should be doing that day, and who she's going to line up. But I'll say to her, look, I think we should speak to this person, or I really like this story. I've also got the institutional memory from having been a reporter for a long time. So I'll say, oh, this was important. I remember I covered this trial, or I did this story, and this development is happening, so I can speak to that. And then she'll start lining up interviews for the day, and I'll start doing the prep. So it takes a good 3 hours to prepare for a 1 hour show, which people don't understand. People think I kind of go in and just wing it, but I really have to know what I'm talking about, because you're interviewing cabinet ministers and newsmakers, and then we try and keep the balance. And I think that's very important for South Africa. So we talk about light and shade in radio, where you have the heavy stuff, but you try and lighten it up. So today, our show was so heavy because we were talking about corruption and Zweli Mkhize, and then we were talking about load shedding at the Helen Joseph Hospital, and how no one has water and no one has power, and it's also bleak and depressing. And then at the end, we did an interview with the Kifness about a collaboration he's done with a cat, and it's gone viral. So we try and always balance it out and make sure that there's light and shade, and laugh a bit. And we take lots of WhatsApp voice notes from people talking about how people, I got one today, it was very funny, about how somebody had just disappeared to Dubai, and how we teleport to Malawi because that's what happens in South Africa. So there's a lot of work. It does leave me feeling depleted, but I do feel exhilarated at the end of a show, especially when it's gone well, because it's a big adrenaline rush, and it's very quick. So you've got to know what you're talking about all the time. And I always have this view that I am only one misstep away from the end of my career. I mean, I could say something on radio tomorrow that would get me cancelled. So it's, you have to be so aware all the time of every single thing that you're saying.
And you can maybe not answer this if you don't want to. What are some of those topics or some of those things that, if you had to touch on, might be the end of your career? Kind of what do you steer away from?
So I don't like to think that we steer away from anything. I like to think that we can discuss anything. But there's some stuff that maybe I don't have the agency to speak about. Also this notion of the fact that journalists are completely objective is a myth. As a young journalist, I used to feel very strongly that I was balanced and impartial and objective. And that's just not true. I come with my own privilege, my own lived experience. So there are some things that I shouldn't be talking about, or I don't have the agency to speak about. And there are some topics that I've also learned that you will just never win with. So, there are one or two, and I mean, it's not hard to work it out. But there are a couple that I certainly don't broach, just because there's no point, actually, because you'll never have a rational conversation about it. But also just the kind of show that I'm doing doesn't leave a lot of room for opinion or too much analysis. A lot of it is daily news. So we do focus pretty much on current events and what's happening right now.
And can you think of a time, share with us maybe your biggest blunder of maybe getting somebody's name wrong, or what do you think was your biggest blunder?
So I can remember every single one of the mistakes that I've made on air. There's been a couple where I've got things wrong. As a young reporter, I don't really want to repeat all of them, because they've either involved some kind of complaint or, something I had to acknowledge was wrong. But when you get something wrong, you remember it. I mean, we always have a joke in the newsroom that you don't want to kill a president, because that literally happened in the EWN newsroom once, where we killed somebody who wasn't dead. That we went on air and said that a president was dead when he was very much alive. And that was a huge issue. So So the things that I'm most careful about is reporting on deaths before families have been informed, next of kin, and also making very sure that people actually are deceased before you go on radio and tell everyone that they are, because that's something that definitely stays with you for a long time. And I've also become a lot more circumspect about what I say on radio. As a young journalist, I would just, didn't really care too much. I kind of just wanted to be first. And now I'm a lot more concerned about being right than being first.
I got a message, a kind of a direct message on the chat saying that the person would love to hear more about the gangster stories. I don't.
Read the book.
Read the Okay, fantastic. Okay, so you do your show, you do the preparation of 3 hours beforehand, then you do the show, and then you're exhausted. Do you listen to the news yourself? Do you go home and listen to CNN, Sky News, or have you had enough of the news after you've actually presented it?
So it's a combination. So I do listen a lot. I'm in the car a lot, schlepping kids in the afternoon. So yeah, I do. I listen to different radio stations, and then I watch a lot of the news as well. I'm reading a lot, and that's the big thing. You have to read a lot. So a lot of daily news, but also lots of analysis, and not just stuff that you agree with or stuff that is about what we are talking about. It's more to form a broader context and understanding. Sorry, my son just walked in. So, I'm reading a lot, but then I also watch news from Africa. I watch ENCA, I watch SABC, I'm watching CNN and all sorts of stuff. So I do follow it, but then sometimes I do want time out, and I will watch the cooking channel or whatever reality shows on. And I listen to a lot of podcasts. I'm a big podcast fan. So if I'm running or walking, I listen to a lot of podcasts, which I find fascinating because it also gives you a deep understanding of newsworthy topics.
Talk to us a little bit about the Mandy Wiener Media. Is that something new? Has it been around for a while? When did you start it? Are you actively involved in it? Give us a little bit of background to that.
So I've been around for a while. I've always done quite a bit of corporate media training and keynote talks. So unfortunately, journalists don't get paid very well in this country, although the people might think that they do. So we all have kind of other gigs on the side that we do to supplement our income. So I do a lot of corporate speaking, keynote talks. I speak about South Africa and my learnings and active citizenship. And one of my favorite things to talk about is being an active citizen and trying to find the silver lining. I've got a front row seat to the worst stories in this country. I'm constantly speaking about how things don't work and are broken and corruption. And I try and give people some inspiration around why it is actually a country worth fighting for and being patriotic about. And then I do a lot of corporate media training in terms of just teaching people how to be interviewed, how to get your message across. Because the truth is, when I'm interviewing somebody, I want them to be able to give me a good interview. I don't go out there intending to destroy someone or be hostile or be critical. I need to get information out of them. And I think that there's a lot of benefit to people learning how to not be afraid of the media, how to embrace the media, how to get your message across, how to deliver it well. So that's something that I do quite a lot of is on the corporate side, is teaching people how to be interviewed, that they can get the best interview.
So what would be your top 3 tips for somebody listening to this?
To be interviewed. So I think it's deciding beforehand what you actually want to say. A lot of people can go and do interviews and survive and not fall off their chair and go viral. And then afterwards they'll look back and they'll say, oh, I should have said this or I should have said that. And that's really important. So make sure you know beforehand what your key messages are, what you actually want to get out of an interview, so that afterwards you can say, oh, I've said what I wanted to say and I've got that message across. The other one is a lot of the interviews you're going to be doing now are virtual interviews. So make sure you know what you're doing. make sure that you know what your background looks like and how to frame yourself and how to use a ring light if you have one, and make sure that your email notifications aren't on and have a beautiful background behind you. So that kind of stuff is really important if you are being interviewed. And so there's lots of tricks you can do to prepare. And I suppose the biggest one is how to bridge, how to answer difficult questions, how to control the interview. I think that's something that people get a lot out of.
Okay, so when you say bridge, what would that mean? I'm not sure if I understand what the bridging means.
So when you ask me a question about what I don't want to speak about on radio and I don't directly answer you, I segue to a comfort zone for myself. So I answer your question, but then I move off and start talking about what I want to speak about. So you're bridging to a topic that you're comfortable with, moving the interview along to what you're comfortable, instead of what the interviewer wants to speak about, rather what the interviewee wants to talk about.
Okay, that reminds
Politicians and spokespeople do that to us all the time.
That reminds me to come back to that point exactly.
That's fine. I'll just bridge again.
What is the one no-no? What is the, if you're being interviewed, what's kind of like the biggest no-no for if you're being interviewed to do?
Don't do what Matthews Poza did on News from Africa last week, where he dropped several F-bombs in a row, because that doesn't go down well with broadcasters. And poor Trolly and Gumby had to kind of push through and not react too much. So that would probably be a no-no. That would get you cut off air pretty fast.
And when you said you ensure you don't fall off a chair, we would have thought that's not true, but it has happened on
It has happened, literally, exactly.
And then a little bit about your personal life. Do you want to kind of share how do you see your work and your personal life coming together, and where do you see your future going? Do you see this forever? Do you see it as a timeline? Do you see it as a step to something else?
So I think balance is really important, and I never always had balance. I used to work a lot, and my phone was on 24/7, and I would get called out in the middle of the night. My friends used to joke about, they used to call it, "Has the Pope died?" Because that literally happened once when we were out on a Saturday night and the Pope died, and I had to leave and go report on the fact that the Pope had died. So I found that I wasn't present in a lot of life experiences, because I was always distracted by, going to the next breaking news story or what was going on. And a lot of it's quite serious and quite heavy. So I'm a big advocate of therapy. As a young reporter, I was doing lots of crime stories, lots of crime scenes, harrowing scenes. So I'm a big advocate of therapy for reporters and being very aware of that. But I think now I got to a stage where I was completely burnt out from reporting, and I took a couple of months off just to have a break. And I think I needed that time and space to deal with it. I don't think I could ever go back to frontline reporting. It's just too intense. You can't do it forever. I have a controversial view for some in the industry where I think it's almost impossible to be a frontline news reporter and have kids. But then you've got people who have 4 kids and go to war zones. I've got colleagues that do that and do brilliant jobs doing that. It's personal. It's absolutely personal, and I think each person has to make their own decision. So I'm quite comfortable doing the show I'm doing now, because at 1 o'clock I'm finished. I can go and spend the afternoon with my kids unless I'm doing something corporate or I'm working on a book. So it does give me that flexibility. I've got friends who've done breakfast radio for years, and that is exhausting. Waking up at 3-4 o'clock every morning and having to function and be on your game. So I don't think that I could necessarily do this forever, but for the time being, it's great. And then a lot of people also ask me, what is your future? Are you going to stay in the country? Are you leaving? And, my answer is I'm very happy right now. And I do believe it's a country worth investing my time and energy in and contributing to. So I'm very happy to continue doing what I'm doing for a while.
So just to elaborate on that, you have all this input coming in, the negative and the positive. What is your view on the country? If you listen to one source, you think we're going down the tubes. If you listen to another one, there's lots of hope. Do you have a view or not?
Sure. Yeah, absolutely. I have a view. Today is the worst day to ask me because it's, like today is just a negative day for South Africans because so many people in Joburg in particular have got no water and no power, and there's load shedding, and there's new allegations of corruption around William Kieser, and the hospitals are overburdened, and we're in a third wave, and we haven't got enough vaccines. So it's easy to call out the negatives, but I definitely think it's important to also get perspective and to not be so easy to criticize. And I feel very strongly about active citizenship and people being responsible, members of society and making a contribution. I feel very strongly that people shouldn't just complain and moan and be armchair critics. It's very easy to call out government, but I think that we also have to make a contribution and vote. Get out there, be involved, get a counselor, speak to your counselor, phone radio stations, support civic society organizations, give money to investigative journalists, buy our books, give money to Outer, or do whatever you can. I think that there's definitely a lot of positives if you want to see them. I did an interview last week with a police sergeant who. It was the most incredible interview. I was so moved by it because she had, just through sheer persistence and passion, had investigated a serial rapist in Pretoria and had just done her job properly and had done an incredible job. And as a result of that, he was sentenced to 1,088 years in prison. And it was just incredible to hear a police officer speaking with passion and dedication. And there are incredible people that are on the ground, good cops, good prosecutors, people doing their jobs properly. And the stories are there. I always joke with my friend Brent Lindekoe, who is the good things guy. We always say that, I'm the bad things girl and he's the good things guy, because he does do a great job of telling the good news stories. And we always say, if it bleeds, it leads, but if it's good, it should. And unfortunately, in South Africa and anywhere in the world, the stories that get the most traction are the bad news stories, are the stories about awful things. But we should be giving as much attention to the stories about good news and the positive things as well.
So that leads to the next question. Eileen put a question on the group, but I'm going to expand it a little bit. Who was the best person you've ever interviewed? And also, who would be your dream person to interview? Who would you like?
So it's funny because people always ask this question and think that I'm going to say, look, I'd love to interview like a Christian Amanpour or Ariana Huffington or someone like that. That would be great for me. But I love interviewing people like this police sergeant that I interviewed last week. That for me is the dream interview, where you just have a compelling human story about, that's the stuff I get excited about and I want to share with everyone and I want everyone to listen to, because I love that stuff where you've just got a very, very cool person who is passionate about their story and the story is interesting and engaging and they tell it in an engaging way. That for me makes the best interview, the best radio. Some of the interviews I did for the whistleblowers, where you sit down with these people and they just relate to you in the most tangible and human way about what they've been through. That stuff is what I love to interview. And I've had opportunities, like I've met Madiba and I asked Oprah a question at a press conference once. And there's lots of very other cool interviews that I've done, but that's not really the stuff that always stays with you. And Brenda Stern says, and Brenda Stern, because she swears brilliantly, she really does swear brilliantly, I see on the chat. And it's people that are expressive and that people that are able to tell their stories in that way, and getting that out of them is my favorite thing about being a journalist.
If we had to sum you up, and would you think people would say Mandy is thick-skinned? Do you feel like you're thick-skinned, or things are water off a duck's back? Or, as you mentioned earlier, you said like you remember everything that went wrong.
Yeah, I used to be thick-skinned when I was younger. And I could never write Killing Kevil today because I would be far more restrained and far more considerate. And what if I upset someone? And let me triple source that. Whereas there, I was a bit like a windgat, I just kind of went for it and hoped for the best. Whereas now I'm much more aware, much more sensitive. I probably should have a thicker skin, considering. I mean, you must see the SMSs that we get from people on radio that don't go to air. And if you just look at how hostile and bitter Twitter is and social media is, it's unbelievable. Because you've got a public profile, people think that you are fair game. So there's a lot of hostility. So I mean, I try not to let that get to me too much, just because you can't. But I do think that it does kind of temper what you say, and I realize the impact of what I say a lot more. Whereas in the past, I'd be like, let's just gun for them. And I'm still pretty critical of politicians and the corrupt and, people that do bad things. But I am a lot more aware of the fact that there are three sides to every story, and giving everyone fair time to ventilate that and hearing all sides of the story. So that's something that I think has probably changed over time.
Are you happy that you are a public figure, or would you prefer to, if you could have it again, would you prefer to be anonymous?
There's pros and cons. That was a great question, David. It's very good. Like, I'm actually quite shy, so I don't like the public attention. A lot of my friends, and I tell them to their face, so I can tell you here, are happy to post selfies of themselves all day, every day on Instagram, and they're constantly posing and taking pictures of themselves. And I don't do that. Like, that is not what, I haven't got that kind of self-esteem, I don't think. And also, I don't consider myself a celebrity. I just happen to be a journalist with a public platform. So I think that's two very different things for me. I don't like being the center of attention. I do sometimes like the anonymity, which is why I go by my married surname. People generally know who I am. So I try not to milk it, but it just is a byproduct of what I do.
If you had to teach your kids now, I'm not sure how old your kids are, but I know they're relatively young. What are the 5 things that you would teach them that you've learned through your career to be a successful person, and however you define as successful?
Sure, 5. That's a lot. So the first thing is, and this is something that Jeremy Maggs writes about in his book that's just come out as well, is about being curious and asking lots of questions. We do not have a problem with our 7-year-olds and asking lots of questions. That happens. Also, I'm about to be load shed, by the way. So if I drop off, I will be back. So to hold that thought, I've got 3 minutes. So the first one is to be curious and ask lots of questions and be inquisitive and learn a lot. Never think that you know everything about everything. The second one is to read. I cannot stress this enough, and I stress it with them all the time. My house is like, literally, you can see the books behind me, but also my husband jokes because there is a delivery for me every single day. Delivery for Mandy, because the publishers send me books all the time to review on air. So I have got a fortune of books. My kids have got a fortune of books, and I think that's something I definitely try and instill in them, is to read. And then I think that's also very important to just be conscious about having an open mind. I find people are very polarized on their opinions, and it's good to be opinionated, but I think you've got to have that willingness to hear an opposing voice. And sometimes people are so firm on, no, this is the way, and I believe that my way is the right way, and you can be persuaded otherwise. To have that kind of open mind and let people convince you of their opinion, and then just also realize that what you say and what you think in your opinion could also have an impact on other people, how they perceive, what their feelings are, and that's why I'm often quite mindful about what I say on a public platform about people, that I don't want to defame people or go out and say awful things, because they also have families, they also have to go home to their children. But at the same time, we also have to hold power to account. And that's our job as journalists, is to make sure that we call people out if they're doing something wrong. I think that's 4, but I think that's probably my list.
I think for me that was 3, but I'll take that as your bridging. Is there anyone that you would refuse to talk to? Is there anyone where they say, we've lined up an interview with so-and-so, that you would step aside and not want to interview or talk to?
No, I don't think so. I mean, no one comes to mind that I can think of. I'm of the view that everyone should get a kind of fair hearing, but I think it has to be given in context. Like, I know that Gareth Cliff's been taken to the BCCSA for interviewing David Icke, and sometimes you can't. There's some people you just can't give a platform to. But I think it's important for people to hear all different sides, but I think you also have a responsibility as a journalist to then provide context. We are not stenographers. And this is often the criticism of journalists, is that people think that you're objective and that you have to be a stenographer. And that's not true. We have to also provide that responsible analysis and interpretation for viewers and for listeners. So I can't go out there and interview someone and then not explain to people why what they are saying is problematic. I do think that the job comes with that responsibility. So off the top of my head, I can't think of anyone that I straight up will not interview. But I'm sure they are, because I won't just give anybody the platform. The platform comes with great responsibility, because you are choosing what is in the public's consciousness. You are impacting the news agenda. You are telling people what to think about. You are telling people how to think about it. And you've got to be very careful with that. So you can't just say, everyone deserves a platform. You come on, you can have 10 minutes. You need to be responsible with it.
I'm going to open it up to some questions now, but before I go there, just a little game I played on my previous interview, which maybe I'll play with you, is I'm going to give you a couple of words and you can just say the first thing that comes to mind.
I'm really hoping load shedding kicks in right about now.
You can create it yourself. So if I say life is.
This is a terrible game. Beautiful.
Could be a little bit longer than that if you want. Okay, great. Success is?
Self-made.
And
success is self-made. I think that's so I don't think that there's such a thing as coincidence. I think that you definitely, everything is an opportunity, and you make your own luck in life. And
Mandy Wiener is
a radio journalist, a broadcaster. I'm really not enjoying this game right now, because I spent so much of my life having to think on the fly on radio, so I should be much better at it, really.
Okay, so what did you say Mandy Wiener is? You gave the definition of a journalist, etc. Okay.
Yes, yeah.
On that note, I'm going to open it up to more difficult questions from the audience. If anybody wants to ask any questions, you can unmute yourself and ask Mandy anything that you think that I haven't covered that you'd like to know.
So there's a couple that have come directly to me.
Okay.
For some reason, they've bypassed you. Please can Mandy say if she sees links between whistleblowers and the links to reporting gender-based violence? She wrote on Reva Steenkamp, what about other forms of discrimination, harassment, and violence to women? I think that I also tend to resonate much better with women as well when I interview them. I just find that's something that's I think I certainly do. The links between whistleblowers and the links to reporting gender-based violence. What's interesting, many of the whistleblowers that I interview in the book are women. I find that that you see a lot more female whistleblowers at State Capture. You've seen most of the whistleblowers have been women, and most of the male whistleblowers have had a very strong single mother, which I was very intrigued by. The fact that seems to have a more entrenched value system in women and in men with strong single mothers. And then, I spend a lot of time also focusing on discrimination, harassment, violence to women. I think it's something that definitely that platform.
I can see Brenda Stern wants to ask a question. Brenda?
Hi, thank you, David. Thank you, Ort. Hey, Mandy.
Hey, Brenda.
Mandy
Try not
Wiener
to swear.
Try not to. Oh, okay, I'll do my best. My niece is sitting here, so I better behave. I would say Mandy Wiener is probably one of the bravest, fiercest women with absolutely intrinsic values of integrity. If I had to answer that question. But that's what I would say. I want to ask you, man, it's just been on the news now, like half an hour ago, that people are nervous about blowing the whistle on the corruption with the procurement of PPEs. I mean, given the numerous interviews you did with whistleblowers, and you know what the problems are, Check to Disclosures Act, etc., where would you recommend they go? What would you recommend they do?
I mean, you know as well as anyone, being a whistleblower yourself, Brenda, that it's just fraught with so many problems. The whole process of blowing the whistle in South Africa and anywhere really. It's interesting though, because Corruption Watch said last year that in the first 6 months of the pandemic, 2,000 people came forward to blow the whistle on PPE corruption, which I thought was a really good thing. But the SIU now investigating more. They obviously need more whistleblowers. I would say go to investigative journalists. I think that's, we've seen with Peter Louis Myburgh and his exposés now around digital vibes, and the contribution of investigative journalists. That definitely is the silver lining for me in the country at the moment is how good journalists are. And then, we need to see more civil society organizations that are existing primarily to protect and encourage and support whistleblowers. And we just don't have enough of those in the country at the moment. So I really, really hope that Zondo takes this opportunity. Countless whistleblowers have gone to the Zondo Commission and said to him, please, you have to do something. You've got to change the law. You have to look at this. And he says, and he said several times that his team is looking at it. And I've given a copy of my book to Ronald Lamola, the Justice Minister, and to Zondo. And I really hope that they take that opportunity, because we wouldn't know half of what we knew about state capture were it not for the whistleblowers that came forward. So we need to change the support system, the legislation. We've got to encourage people. Otherwise, there's no ways we'll get on top of corruption.
Thank you. Any other questions? Anyone else want to ask a question?
Yeah, Mandy, you've had all this exposure to what's going on in this country with the corruption and everything that's gone on. We set the Zondo Commission. There's things coming through in the press every day. What is going to happen? Do you think anything's going to be done? There's a huge frustration amongst people. There's a lot of talk and nothing happens.
I hear you. I share your frustration. I know that people want to see prosecutions. They want to see convictions. I'm telling you now, and please believe me, there is a lot of work going on behind the scenes. So at the investigating directorate under Hermione Cronje, they are working hard. They also had huge challenges. They inherited an NPA that had been dismantled. It had been eviscerated under the state capture era. So they've had to fix the plane while in flight. And what's happening at the moment is a lot of those investigations are happening, but they have to wait for the State Capture Commission to be finished. They can't go and arrest Mosebenzi Zwane, who's given the most outrageous explanations at the Zondo Commission, because they have to wait for him to finish his testimony. So I'm pretty sure that we'll start seeing a lot more arrests happening once Zondo is finished, and once those findings of the Zondo Commission come out. But also the wheels of justice turn. They turn slowly, but they turn eventually. And I think that, Jacob Zuma's running out of space at the moment with the Constitutional Court. That trial hopefully will start at some point. We've seen Ace Makashule being charged. Ramaphosa has successfully managed to gain control over the ANC as far as that faction is concerned. So there is stuff happening if you want to see it. And I'm optimistic. I do think that the NPA is being rebuilt, that those, and just look at the SIU. Today, the Special Investigating Unit was briefing SCOPA, the Oversight Committee in Parliament. And there is a lot of work that's being done in terms of holding those people to account. The fact that we know about William Key's and digital vibes is a good thing, because sunlight is the best disinfectant. So it depends how you want to look at it. But I think that there are positives and things are happening.
Thank you.
So Mandy, it looks like you've been let off the hook from load shedding as well.
Oh, you know how unpredictable it is. Who knows what could happen?
So just as a sum up, first of all, I want to thank you for sharing the stories and your own personal story. So if I can just sum up the lessons from what you've said, it's be curious, always be curious, read a lot, be open-minded, and if you want to be successful, it's self-made. Anything you want to add to that maybe I've missed out, or any last thoughts from
bridge? Don't forget to bridge.
The bridge. It might be a bridge too far, but man, I just want to thank you. I know how busy you are. I want to thank you and your husband, because I know we're taking time from your family time, and you're always busy with these things. And thank you so much for spending just over the last hour with us and letting us into your world and giving us insight. So thank you so much.
It's such a pleasure. And thank you so much for having me, and the questions on the chats and all the comments. I've seen them all. So thank you for the engagement. And yeah, I mean, it's pretty amazing that no children have interrupted this broadcast, nor has load shedding. So that's always a good day.
And on that good day note, I'd like to thank you for spending the time with us in the Ort Boardroom, and I look forward to hosting you again in our next conversation. I'm David Zidel, and I'll see you in the boardroom.